you. Hello everyone, I'm mavrogiannopoulos. I'm the author of Genius Areas. And I'm going to talk about unifying access to cryptographic objects. If you're wondering what is it, I will explain during the presentation. An outline of the presentation is, first I'm going to talk about, probably you know already as I've seen in the previous presentations, but I will elaborate on what our cryptographic tokens and modules are, what are cryptographic objects, what I mean by it, and what do I mean by access to the objects, and what are the open issues that we face today, and also about the modules. How do we access today, and what issues we have. So, as you may know or not, cryptographic tokens are various hardware things that we use not only to store keys, and actually not to store keys, but to use operation on keys without actually accessing the keys. So when you insert a cryptographic token on a card reader, this is a smart card or a USB token, you insert it on your PC, you can perform cryptographic operations, but you are sure that after you remove the token, the PC doesn't have any access to the key. So there can also be software tokens. Non-keying is a security module that is pure in software, and all of these tokens, they can be accessed in a common way via pkcs11 API. What do they contain, these tokens? They can contain cryptographic keys, the corresponding certificates, and probably a list of trusted certificates. So they can contain stuff that you can use to authenticate yourself to some site or some other party. And they are mainly accessed through pkcs11 modules. What are these modules? pkcs11 modules are just normal shell libraries that they provide you access to a consistent API, but give you access to operations, cryptographic operations. If you search your system, probably you have some such library in this directory. Now I'm going to talk about accessing objects and what are the issues. So, in typical applications today, cryptographic applications, when you want to provide your identity, they ask you for a key file and a certificate file. What are these? It's a file that contains your private key and your certificate. Let's say if you use the GNU-DLS CLI client or the OpenSSL client, in order to connect to a site, you can specify at the command line a key and a certificate. But when you want to specify a key that resides on a token, you have to use really special options. Really, I don't remember how it is in OpenSSL, but it's pretty hard almost in every program to do. And some, even worse, some programs, they require you to enter the slot number of the smart card. Let's say if you have a smart card reader that has many slots, it might require you to type the slot number, but you don't really care about that. So what are the problems? Objects are referenced in a way that is really unique per application. We don't like that. Why should I specify different options for OpenSSL and different for GNU-DLS and different for any other library? So what requirements we have for that? How can I identify an object in a unique way? Object has an object ID. Now the whole context is pkcs11. Every object has an object ID. It has a type. It can be a certificate, a private key, it can be some other data. And also there is a token ID, which says this object resides on this token. So you don't copy a different object that resides on another token, but might have the same ID. And also what we want is to know how are we going to access this object, via which module. Say if you use OpenSC, and you want to access a pkcs11 card, you want to specify that I want to access this module via the OpenSC interface, not some other interface that is not easy in your system. So some examples. Let's say in OpenVPN, in order to specify a private key and a certificate that resides on a token, you have to specify an ID, something like this. In OpenSSL, if you use the pkcs11 OpenSC engine, it's some other different ID. But a nice thing that occurred in the Oracle pkcs11 implementation is that they created the concept of pkcs11 URLs. This is a standardized way to specify tokens, standardized via EF. It's specified on this graph, and it can be used to uniquely describe a token and also an object. You can specify both things. This is how it looks like. It's, I think it's more readable than, let's say, the pkcs11 helper string, although it might be a bit intimidating, but it's pretty clean. What does it mean? It means this object is a certificate. The same has that ID. It is resides on that token made by this manufacturer and this model. So, what are the advantages of using URLs to identify objects? We can describe all tokens. It doesn't care about any slot. And it can be used to share between applications. Let's say if all applications decide to standardize this URL scheme, you can copy, let's say, the position of your certificate, your URL, from one application to the other. And a nice also property is that it can be used in command line, because they are purely text. You can, let's say, if you use GNU TLS click, you can specify instead of key file, you can put a pkcs11 URL, and GNU TLS will just load your certificate and your private key from the smart card. And this is a backward compatible way to specify keys that are either on your file system or reside on a token. Yeah, this is the proposal, what we propose as a TLS project to describe objects on a token. So I'm going to talk about a different problem that is mainly for developers that work with pkcs11 modules. We had these problems implementing pkcs11 supporting TLS. There's no system-wide way to read, to know which pkcs11 libraries to use. Let's say in my system there are many libraries, but I don't want to use them all. How can we system-wide specify these libraries should be there? They should be loaded by GNU TLS or by OpenSSL or by any other project. We don't have this today. And also pkcs11 has issues when multiple users use a module. I'm going to talk about the first one first. There is a proposed file system hierarchy standard that they say put all the modules in that directory and load then GNU TLS and OpenSSL will load them. But it has a problem. I found there that there are some testing modules that as long as you use it in GNU TLS, you get some errors in the standard error. They say this is a testing module and stuff. This is not nice. Also, I found that OpenSC has two libraries that have the same identification as pkcs11. And when you list objects, they give you the same objects, sharing the same URLs. So it's impossible to use this directory and load all the libraries from that. So for GNU TLS, we use a special configuration file, although this is not a solution. We want something better than that. So this is an open problem today. Another problem, access to modules. In Linux, in Debian or so, it's very common to have setups like this. We can have a layout where an application is using two subsystems. One subsystem is using GNU-TLS and the other is using OpenSSL. And let's suppose that both they use objects from pkcs11, from even from different libraries or from the same library. What will happen when subsystem B, let's say, it's no longer used by the application? Say it's the loaded library and the application unloads it. OpenSSL will clean up and will also clean up pkcs11. Then GNU-TLS will stay looking at nothing. You will have no backend, and either the application will crash or it will be just unusable. So this is the second problem of pkcs11. We need a way to make it usable by multiple users in the same application. In order to solve these issues, Steph Holder, who will be presenting next, he's working on that, on a solution called P11 Kit. So, what I've told you actually is what open problems we have. I propose a solution only to the first one, and the others are still open. So today we have no common way to specify objects. pkcs11 URLs might be a solution that we like in GNU-TLS, and we have problems accessing modules in a single application, and we have problems with the configuration file that is not there. Are there any questions? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Who has adopted this URL scheme? Has anybody adopted it?
The Oracle pkcs11 module uses, and GNU-TLS already uses.
And
GNOME Kirin.
Maybe I can testify it's a real problem in smart cards. We do a lot of testing, and it's very usual that you can lock the smart card with one application and then you cannot stop another application. So your piece of software is really important for the community. I would say it's an absolute priority.
Have you made experiments? So I think, what about other SSL and security libraries? You said
about other libraries.
Yes, I think you focus on GNU-TLS right now.
Actually, I described problems I had during the implementation of this thing on GNU-TLS, but I think the same problems exist in other libraries. Every library has its own way. OpenSSL has its own way of specifying objects. NSS has its own way. It has a web interface or something. I don't think you can command line, or I don't know. But the same problems are there. It's nice if they're solved in all of them.
You're saying that all the applications should be using a common configuration file. There it will be specified which modules should be used.
Yeah.
But that would be quite platform specific, because you would have to have a specification, for example, for the Linux system.
What do you mean different? Like
well, for example, if you want to have a cross-platform solution that will work on both Mac OS, Linux, and Windows, you would have to define, for example, how to compare the platform.
so could you close the door because I really can't hear.
In the case of the Unix-like systems, that would be easy to accomplish, because most Unix file systems comply to the FHS. But in case of Windows, it has files all over the place, and it would be a good question where such a configuration file should be placed.
And you mean about a solution that also covers Windows? Yeah, I suppose Windows will use something different. They will not use a configuration file. Maybe it's something in the registry.
Still, in the end, you'd have to push a kind of standard for that.
But in Windows, you don't really care. It has its own framework for cryptography. I don't know, although GNU-TLS, let's say, also runs in Windows, maybe it's easier to use the pkcs11 or the CSP thing in Windows. But I don't know how it can be cross-platform, a configuration file cross-platform in Windows and Linux. I don't know.
That's the thing that I'm actually implying. That it's quite platform-specific solution.
It could be at least for all POSIX systems that have a file system.
I think that rather than a configuration file, if it's going to be really cross-platform, then it needs to be a configuration API, as in a library provider that uses whatever system-specific backend to store configuration as is relevant for that system. I think just a plain file might be, it will work fantastically well on POSIX-ish systems, but it might not be enough to cover others as well.
Yeah.
Another question that I thought of here, the pkcs11 URLs, have you seen them used in a GUI anywhere? Is the Oracle thing a graphical, does it have a graphical user interface?
I've only used it in the command line.
Okay.
But why, what's the difference? Usually in a GUI you wouldn't see them. You would see only a description of your object, and you could also copy the object, let's say, from one application to the other. And when you copy, you don't care seeing actually what do you copy. It's like when copying files.
Except the file is just one object, or just one, it has one atom of identity, a single
It's the same.
single field of identity.
It's pretty unique. It's unique.
Yeah, sure, it's unique, but it's if you have a graphical user interface, the wrong way to do it is to have a text box where you paste the pkcs11
Maybe
URL.
you can drag and drop. If you're
Yeah, sure.
It would be a nice backend to drag and drop. You just transfer URLs.
Yeah, so that was my question. If you had seen it implemented anywhere, or
I don't know. The only other implementation I have seen is Oracle,
yeah,
but it's also command line.
okay.
But maybe it's
We are implementing it in the GUI library in
Okay.
The idea that we would see some kind of a tree widget, and then select the one you want, and then demo the URL will be used without the user even seeing the URL. Is that the idea?
I suppose.
something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So then that answers his question, which is in a GUI the URLs will not be seen at all.
I think question the RFC or whatever the document was, it's also done by Oracle guys.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically it's a chicken and egg thing.
It's done by Oracle guys, but it has a lot of feedback from me and Steph.
How is the IETF process going there?
It's just an informational RFC. It's not much process. When they say they are ready, it can be published informational RFC. It's not a standard.
I think there are two issues with the thing. That one is that the URL omits the actual path to the file name, what the application eventually has to do. It has to deopen the shared library. And the second thing is that somebody asked about cross-platform usability. The thing is that Linux or the Unix, the free Unix, is the only platform which doesn't have any kind of a system API, which the Fedora guys are trying to fix by, resorting to a single kind of a platform supported, the distribution supported triple ref library, which is NSS, which kind of solves it because it just has its own internal kind of a thing that registers all the models you want to use, which is of course not reusable, and which forces you to use NSS, which is also not okay, I think, for most Linux users.
Yeah, it can be one solution, but about the first thing you said, that you don't have the library there, I don't think you want to have the library there. What you can do actually is have the library name there, the pkcs11 name of the library. So as long as the application has, as I said, you need a configuration file or something that you can know which libraries to load, as long as you have them, you can know which library to load the object from.
You split the configuration into two. You're going to have the application-specific one, or you're going to depend on the file system hierarchy standard, and you have your own URL specification. You anyway split the problem into more, pieces you have to manage, from my point of view.
Yeah, Actually, when you have a big problem, it's better to split it. So it's
Well, the idea is straight, drag and drop. It's like that's something that's actually missing. Is when people say that GNOME and KDE, how can they work together? But the free desktop has a lot of standards that deal with like drag and drop, and that should work across applications with different frameworks.
Well, it's a good idea because you have smart cards that have a proprietary middleware and you have an OpenSC implementation. So if you have in the URL you have the path for a proprietary one, we could have an application that would use the same URL using the OpenSC middleware. So it's not good to hard code things that aren't necessarily relevant into the URL.
It's definitely interesting.
But for me, the best thing is not the drag and drop, but the fact that you're going to use the old options, specify a key file and a certificate file to read the URL and then act appropriately. So you don't really need obscure options, let's say pkcs11 ID or something. You just use the old options and specify pkcs11 URL there.
Another question, is there a reference implementation actually implementing using the URLs?
In GNU-TLS.
In GNU-TLS.
The development release uses the URLs.
Right, because it needs to be very easily kind of usable again.
Yeah.
I have one question. I'm not sure if it's really relevant to the topic, but I was wondering if there's any access control in these URLs. Can you prevent other applications from accessing cryptographic tokens that are happy to plug into the system?
Usually tokens are protected by a PIN or something. So it depends on the token, whether the driver will allow you to access or not. I don't know, probably Martin will know better about how tokens
Basically,
do
it's
access control.
what the URL tries to do. URL is a resource specifier. You just point to a resource. How the token actually protects its resources is totally up to the token implementation. It's left outside of pkcs11 even. Thank you. If there are no more questions. No. Thanks.